Friends and ladies and gentlemen, and I will just start by making the little addition that in fact all lectures today are group work. So we are the speakers, the mouthpiece of groups working on it. And not only people here are sitting around who have also contributed to the lectures, but also very probably people now being online from Europe. So for instance, in this group there are Erwin and Bauke and also 2 German members have contributed very much, and very probably those 2 German members, Sieglinde Plocki and Ralf Kammer, are now listening with us. So you can always understand that it is not only this room which is listening to the lectures. And if you have questions about things which you really do not understand, you can always put on your finger and we'll deal with it because Irene is ready for the mic. Yeah. Okay, in this first part, it's about the jewels of wisdom, reincarnation, karma, hierarchies. And all people, at least at some point in their life, are looking for an answer to the questions and sorrows of human life. Many people have intuitions that all beings are interconnected, that our life has a meaning, and that we have a free will and responsibility. But they often lack a philosophy of life that is of real and unremitting value during all the challenges of our life. In this lecture, we shall investigate 3 building blocks of such a philosophy of life: reincarnation, karma, and hierarchies. These jewels of wisdom are based on the 3 fundamental ideas mentioned in the first lecture of Jos, which we may summarize as boundlessness, cyclic motion, and all beings are equal in essence. And as already said, we present these ideas as hypotheses that you can, and to be honest, that you must investigate yourself. Do these jewels give explanations which are satisfying for your mind and heart? Then they are worthy to be applied in your life. Well, one thing is sure. In the world, we find an overwhelming variety of views on life and death. And the view we ourselves adopt has a large influence on our aims, on our acts and thoughts in life. Probably even more than we are aware of. That's why reincarnation will be the best starting point of our today's journey into the jewels of wisdom. Well, what is reincarnation? The word has become generally known, but still many people only have a vague idea of its meaning. The literal meaning is becoming flesh again, living in a body of flesh again. It means that life after life we are coming back to this earth to learn our lessons in bodies of flesh and to further develop all the faculties which are latent in us. Can you prove that reincarnation exists? Is an important first question. And we think that everyone can find that out for himself. Once you realize that reincarnation is no exception in nature, not something that appears out of the blue, but it is in fact one form of a universal law of cycles. We see cyclic motion, as already said this morning, everywhere in nature. Night and day, the 4 seasons of the year, the 12-year solar cycle of sunspots. Yes, astronomers even speak about the birth and death of stars. Looking into our physical body, we see that all processes are cyclic, from our digestion to the electric pulses of our nerve cells. And our scientists know that subatomic particles are no solid tiny balls. No, each little particle also has a wave character, and sometimes it behaves like a wave. To sum up, reincarnation thus is a cyclic process of living again and again in a body of flesh. And this leads us to the question, what is incarnating? What experiences all these phases of life and death? Yeah, it's okay. And what experiences all these phases of activity and rest? And at this point, we refer again to the introductory lecture in which you heard that life or consciousness is the force working behind all manifested things. Each being is a center of life or consciousness, which is limitless in its core, because we are all children of the boundless. So it is consciousness that reincarnates, that is in the alternating state of active life and spiritual rest. And in the beautiful symbolic language of the ancient religions, these cycles of consciousness are called the breathing out and the breathing in of Brahman. You can say the projection of consciousness into material existence, always followed by the orderly retracting into its spiritual source again. Or, to cite the Quran, to Allah we belong, and to Him is our return. Or, we see in Taoism, the returning is the movement of Tao. This knowledge of reincarnation brings us to the next question. What are we? What is man? And next scheme is already shown this morning. This gives us a very big, great help. This threefold division is only one way to describe the several capacities or layers of our human consciousness. But it is relatively well known, so we use it often. For instance, we can find it in the sayings of the Apostle Paul in the Bible, spirit, soul, and body. And let us again have a little look on it. Especially important is the vertical line, originating in the universal unity. We human beings are a stream of consciousness, flowing forth or emanating, we say, from the universal unity. All things have spiritual roots, we men too. The highest and greatest circle, called spirit, is our core, our highest self. This is our permanent part, and it carries all possibilities of the cosmos in itself. This spirit sends a ray downwards, and that ray forms a center of consciousness on a lower plane, the mental plane. And that we may call our soul, our learning part, the part that improves itself, develops itself. We human beings are trying to develop our thinking, our mental capacities, with all its many possibilities and also pitfalls. Lastly, The ray of consciousness brings forth our body, our most material part, although it is a living part too, as Jos already said. It is the instrument that we need to function in this physical world. And as we all know, our body is transitory as a unity. When we die, we draw back our consciousness to the inner planes and thus release our grip on our body. And all entities that ensouled ourselves are freed, and they go their own way. As a coherent system, our body disintegrates, but all those little lives just are not disintegrated, but follow their own path. So, what are we? We are, in essence, a spiritual being, an everlasting, reincarnating being. And each incarnation we build up a body. In us is a permanent and a temporary part. If we keep this in mind when looking at our fellow men, life becomes a daily inspiration. The key to understand ourselves is the fact that our soul, our mind, can focus on all levels of our being, from the divine to the physical. And this is illustrated in the scheme by the 7 thinking aspects at the right side, already mentioned by Jos. These thinking aspects vary from the most universal, inspiring one, and that is the Atman, you say, the inspiration, possibility in our thinking, to the most limited one, and that is our bodily thoughts, Sthula Sharira, the physical. What we wish to show now is that we are all, by our thinking, able to make our spirit part the leading force in our life. By, in fact, focusing our mental antenna to our real, reincarnating higher self. This fact gives us a clue to the question why so very few people are able to look back consciously, fully awake, into their former lives. It is possible, but only if we live entirely in our permanent reincarnating parts. Simply because in that part our remembrances from former lives are stored. But we dare to say, most people, me included, are still living so much in their temporary part that we as yet have no conscious access to all these remembrances. Next logical question is, how does reincarnation work? What happens when we die? A natural event that all of us will experience and, indeed, have experienced many times before. There is still much fear and a great uncertainty about what may happen to us after death in our generation. And the cause for this troublesome situation is a lack of knowledge about what we are. Yet, we can become utterly familiar with death if we would realize that death and sleep follow the same process. Sleep and death are brothers, the old Greek said. Or to say it in the words of the Christian Apostle Paul, we die each day. Yes, truly. While sleeping, we pass the same states of consciousness as during our death. And in the next scheme, this analogy is elaborated. What happens when we fall asleep? We are a stream of consciousness stretching from the heart of the universe to the lowest material form, the outer body. Every night, this stream of consciousness retreats to the inner sphere. So, that is the right side, the spiritual sphere. You temporarily let go of your attraction to the physical sphere. you lose the waking state of consciousness and start to dream. It's at the point of the star. And after a night's rest, you will slowly wake up, pick up your daily thoughts again, recollecting the thoughts and atoms, and start to become active in the physical world. Now, what is death? It is a perfect sleep. The only difference is that you will change to a new body, which is why the process is called re-embodiment. But the process is the same. During sleep, we experience the things that made an impression on our minds during the last day or the last days, our emotions or anxieties, our desires of all kinds of sorts, our ideals too, our inspiring thoughts. During death, exactly the same happens. In both cases, when we are dead or when we are asleep, we meet ourselves. Nothing strange or unfamiliar or unexpected. So, dying and being born are the most natural processes we can imagine, that we should not fear at all, as we do not fear falling asleep either, longing for a rest after a day of experiences. Now, we have this interesting advice of Pythagoras, the Greek wise man. Do not start to sleep before you have gone over the day in thoughts and have drawn honest lessons from it. If you are not satisfied with some things that you did, then decide to do it in another way tomorrow. And these spiritual lessons will accompany you during your sleep and will be a real help during the following day. Even in the midst of a turbulent environment, we can keep our consciousness focused on our ideals and insights. Well, after dying, directly after our last heartbeat, something similar happens. And this very important phase in our dying process we call our panoramic vision. What happens then? It is a review of our past incarnation, but from an enlightened standpoint, enlightened by our higher nature. We see as a wonderful panorama of events, each thought, each experience we had, from babyhood till our last breath. In fact, passing by as a kind of cinema. And even more important, we recognize cause and effects and the justice of what happened in our life. From this panoramic vision, we draw very important spiritual lessons that will become part of our conscience, so that these lessons may guide and lead us in our next incarnation. That's why it is recommended to surround each dying person with a sphere of inner peace and calmness, with as little noise and emotions as is possible. For these hours, in a certain way, are the most valuable hours of our life. So, there is a very close similarity between sleep and death. We call it a cycle, but in fact it is no closed cycle, but a spiral. Opsa. Because we can learn each day, if we wish to learn, of course. Now, I think you all are open-minded people, not satisfied with all of your present thoughts, otherwise you would not be here. So you know what it is to live in a spiral. Okay, the virtue of wisdom points to the fact that each life is only one in a long series of lives, but it does not provide us with an answer to, When and where do we incarnate? Why are we born in a specific family, in a specific culture? And the second jewel of wisdom gives us the key. This jewel is generally known as the law of cause and effect, meaning simply that each cause leads to a result that is equivalent to its cause, similar in character and similar in strength. This universal habit of nature is widely known today as the law of karma. It is the teaching that nothing happens randomly and without cause, but that the whole cosmos is ruled by inescapable law, by cause and effect. Karma is a Sanskrit word meaning action. All actions, and a thought or a feeling is also an action, will have their due effects, now or later, that will come back to its originator, like a boomerang. As the English saying runs, what goes around comes around. Hoppa. The other side of the coin is, each event in our life, each situation can be traced back to causes that we generated ourselves, either in this life or in former lives. So when and where we incarnate is a matter of cause and effect. When we human souls come back to Earth, we will be automatically attracted to that period, to that culture, and also to that family, to that father and mother, which corresponds to our own character, which gives us the optimal chances to express our own character. We are, without exception, drawn back to situations that are familiar to us, where we have sown causal seeds, and consequently where we will have to harvest, nice or nasty. Our children, for instance, are old colleagues, persons that we probably have met many, many times before in former lives. Where are your proofs of karma? We sometimes hear. Well, what about the physical world, where all physical laws are based on the law of cause and effect? We are so used to rely on this law that we hardly think about it. Nobody is surprised that the effect of a tennis ball depends on the way you hit it back. Or when a big dog jumps on you, you have more difficulty to keep standing than when a chihuahua jumps on your feet. But why should this unfailing relation be only valid in the physical world? Why would a strong thought not have a larger mental impact than a weak, flitting thought? Why would a really inspiring idea not have a spiritual impact throughout the rest of your life? No, maybe also to our next lives. According to Theosophy, karma works equally on all planes of the cosmos. So, all our thoughts and acts produce corresponding results, but as we all know, not always immediately. The results may appear in a split second, for instance when you are steering your car, or they appear after centuries, as is the case with many reform movements in our society. But the results will come. And here, the jewel of reincarnation is just as necessary as the jewel of karma. We can only understand our present fate if we remember that our present life is only one step or phase in an unending development, an unending series of causes and effects. That's why we can distinguish three kinds of karma. First, karma that we encounter now and that we produced in the past, in this or earlier incarnations. If we take the example of family life, we may think of the friendly or, in the unhappy case, the clashing and conflicting relations between brothers and sisters, or children and parents, all generated by former actions in the past. Secondly, second form of karma, karma that we produce now by our thinking and behavior, and it will have its effects in this or future lives. For instance, it is always possible to break through a cycle of revenge or hatred with other people by starting to sow seeds of a neutral kind. This will be easier for us if we realize that we are laying the foundations for a better common future for all. Karma has nothing to do with predestination. It is in fact the teaching of free will, of getting a new chance. Thirdly, there is karma that we did produce in former incarnations, but that cannot find a suitable outlet, a suitable expression in this life. These karmic seeds, they lay slumbering in our consciousness and will awaken someday in a future incarnation when the seeds are ripe and the environment is suitable. To mention a simple example, in this present incarnation, we will not meet all the people with whom we have built up a relationship. Yet, without doubts, they will be our companions in future lives. So, when one of our beloved family members or friends dies, we can say with full conviction, "See you later." And the stronger your relationship is, the quicker you meet again in the next life. Our future is, as you see, directly connected to what we do in the present and did in the past. And we know a saying that wonderfully summarizes the teaching of karma and reincarnation together. The future does not lay ahead of us, but comes over us as a wave from the past. So karma teaches us that living is lifelong learning. And how do we learn? By meeting the results of our attempts. Well, we often hear talk about so-called positive and negative karma. Circumstances that are easy for us or difficult for us. But we wonder if we really understand karma, whether we would ever use those terms positive and negative karma. Just realize this. How often are our problems in fact wake-up calls? Can we call them bad karma when we learn from them? The problems of our lives often stimulate us to develop inner faculties that we had not expected to possess. They stimulate us to extend our vision, to become milder. Above all, they make us more compassionate toward our fellow men, which face similar struggles as we experience. Again we ask, how do we learn? And another inspiring conclusion from reincarnation and karma is this: we never learn alone, but always in groups. Why? Because all beings are rooted in the boundless, in universal unity. We are inseparably connected to each other and always will be. So we reincarnate in groups, small and large. We learn by exchanging thoughts, by cooperation, by being each other's teachers and pupils. We may talk about our family or the circle of our friends and enemies, or we may talk about our town or country. These are all groups of individuals that incarnate approximately simultaneously, because they have the same attractions and character in common. Our individual development is inseparably linked to the development of all group members. And that means Simply, we have a clear responsibility for the whole group, our contribution to it. Inner growth is always a mutual process. But that does not mean that we always will reincarnate in the same groups. Quite the opposite is true. Our attraction to groups changes while we evolve. It is a very dynamic process. In each group, there is a continuous flow in of newcomers and a flow out of people who gradually feel more attracted to other groups, simply comparable to a normal school. This highly interesting fact that each human being is a member of several groups leads us directly to the third jewel of wisdom that we present to you in this lecture, called the jewel of the hierarchical structure of the universe. The first jewel, reincarnation, teaches us who we are, eternal pilgrims, developing our consciousness incarnation after incarnation. The second jewel, karma, teaches us that we choose and direct our own path of learning. It is the doctrine of free will. And the third jewel, hierarchies, teaches us our relation to the cosmos, to all other living beings. It teaches us that we are inseparable parts of a living cosmos, as also Jos said, and that the cosmos is built up by beings on different levels of development, that nevertheless form a unity. All levels of development are necessary, otherwise the universe would not function at all. Just as in a company or firm, all types of workers are needed. For instance, a planet is a cooperation of divine beings, intellectual beings, astral beings, physical beings, in fact, a countless number of beings, but all united by one top being or hierarch, which is their divine root. This means that we human beings do not live on the earth, as we usually say. We do not walk on the earth, but we live in the earth, in this hierarchy. And mankind is a vital organ in our planet. If mankind does not function well, the whole planet, so to say, will become ill. This hierarchical structure has no bounds or limits. Small hierarchies are parts of greater ones. Think about the sequence atom, human being. We are part of a planet, and that is part of a solar system, that is part of a galaxy, and you can go on. The top, so there are lives within lives, hierarchies within hierarchies. And the top of each hierarchy is simply the lowest level of a higher and greater hierarchy. And there are no limits in this succession. All are interwoven with each other, lives within lives. Oh yeah. In many religions, this third jewel of wisdom is wonderfully symbolized by the tree of life. The tree of life is a symbol of the cosmos, the living cosmos. It is rooted in the unknown, rooted in, you see, in the higher spheres, in boundless life. And the divine stem gives birth to large branches, which produce small branches, and then little twigs, then leaves and flowers. Yet through this immense cosmic tree flows one life, one consciousness. So each being is a child of the same universal life. Someone who tries to isolate himself from all other beings is simply striving for something that cannot exist. We cannot live alone. Brotherhood is a fact. It is not a fake ideal or a wish. Of course, we human beings are also a branch in this tree of life. It is our duty as human beings to transform the stream of consciousness, the stream of wisdom and knowledge, flowing from beings wiser than we to beings less wise than we are. We are always both teachers and pupils. Teachers for all the people who are still struggling with the problems that we already mastered somehow. And we are pupils of all the people that can teach us something. And sometimes we are both at the same time. Furthermore, the sages taught that each being is built up or structured just like the cosmos is. We, as an individual human, for instance, are a tree of life, a hierarchy too, a little one. Our spirit, soul, and body part are the emanations or copies of the spirit, soul, and body part of the cosmos in which we live. Our inner and outer nature reflects faithfully the structure of the cosmos. And it is a wonderful thought. We are children of the cosmos and thus carry all the elements of the cosmos in us. We are a little cosmos, a microcosmos ourselves. And that's why we have intimate relations and connections with all the cosmic planes, from the most divine to the most material. The most inspiring people we know in our world are always those people who have learned to live in accordance to their own higher nature, their real self. They understand that unity and cooperations are the keys for happiness to all. Examples, famous examples, are Mandela, Gandhi, and great spiritual teachers like Gautama the Buddha, Plato, Jesus, and Mohammed. But, in fact, each unselfish person helps mankind greatly, whether he is publicly known or not. In fact, those people who control their own lower nature, who, within their own little cosmos, have mastered their own instincts and selfishness, are the natural leaders, the real leaders of mankind, whether they occupy a high position in our society or not. Now, you must not get the idea of hierarchies as a kind of static frozen structures. Each living being, its hierarchy, has its birth phase, its phase of greatest strength, and its old age and death phase, as we already found out in the first jewel, the cycle of re-embodiment. And what does this mean, the birth and growth for hierarchy? How does that take place? It always proceeds from within to without. From its divine core, you can say the seed, stepwise through all the intermediary planes until the most material plane of the hierarchy is activated. And this process, the ancient philosophers called emanation, which means flowing forth from within. Emanation is no creation out of nothing, which in our eyes is impossible. Let us describe what it is in 4 steps to give you a very general sketch. The top being, so the divine seed, emanates a field of consciousness, which is a kind of psychomagnetic field. A kind of field of force. To this field, less developed beings are attracted, forming an appropriate vehicle or body or organism through which the leading being can express itself. Now, this is only one step from the divine to the spiritual sphere, but this process of forming a sphere and then attracting a vehicle in the form of lower developed beings is each time repeated throughout all planes until finally the physical plane is reached. This last step to the physical level we see everywhere around us. For instance, in the appearance and development of a human embryo. An incarnating human soul connects itself by the ray he sends out. It connects itself to a sperm cell and an egg cell. And after a successful fertilization, that fertilized cell acts as the center of a very strong psychomagnetic field, which attracts all the cell entities and atom entities needed to build up the body, its own body, and it goes via the mother. Now, this dual of wisdom of the hierarchical cooperation of all beings has a lot of consequences. Let us look at our societies. There, the cosmical hierarchical structure is generally copied only in its outer form, but alas, very seldom in its inner true character. And let us explain what we mean. We usually only copy the outer form. Each organization has its leaders, and usually is built up of several smaller departments that function as the organs of a body. But often it's forgotten that each hierarchy, for instance a firm or a family, whatever you think about, that each hierarchy is a unity, and not only that, it is a small part of a greater hierarchy. All human organizations are inseparable parts of humanity. Consequently, when you think about it, the sole value of an organization lies in its servitude to the interests of all human beings in the world. Another thought to think about, each organization has a spirit, soul and body part. Only that simple thought. So all three should play their appropriate role. A society needs more than material welfare and technical progress. Otherwise we stay spiritually hungry. Our deepest needs are on the level of understanding the meaning of life, on the level of the jewels of wisdom. A last thought, if we understand this jewel well, we get a completely other idea of leadership than is generally thought. One of the characteristics of a real leader is he really serves the interests of all people within his sphere of influence, within his psychomagnetic field. And he will understand that everyone within his organization is equal in intrinsic value, because all are necessary links in the web. So, we have touched upon the three jewels of wisdom in this lecture. You will have noticed that we cannot separate the jewels of wisdom. They complement each other. Now we can draw some conclusions. Can we influence our next lives? Can we become the masters of our fate? Our incarnations are like the days of our life. Our past days define what we may expect tomorrow. We develop our consciousness by the lessons that the law of cause and effect bring us. And each day, each hour, we have the choice to attune our consciousness to the spiritual level of ourselves with its unselfish, reforming and harmonizing influences, or contrarily to purely material aims and desires. This does not mean that the material world is morally wrong. It only that material world needs wise direction. We need the inspiration from the spiritual worlds to become masters and not the slaves in this material world, where our duties lie. Cooperation unity is the keynote of nature. We can act in harmony with nature, or try to do the opposite. We can choose, but the road to active brotherhood and inner peace is always choosing to live in unity. So we determine now our future by building up harmonious relationships or not. We decide ourselves how the laws of reincarnation, karma, and hierarchies will affect us. We can start a new life each moment, and no effort will be lost. Does inner growth ever stop? What will our future bring? This will be the subject of the next 2 lectures of Richard and Ken, but that it will be in the starting of the afternoon after the workshop. Thank you very much. And now you will be the one which is the speaker. And as we are used to, I don't know whether we just immediately go to the workshop or have a little pause?
No, we have questions. We have time for a few questions.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. Time for a few questions.
I have heard various approaches to this subject, and about unmerited karma, and I'd like to hear other people's opinions on this. I can give you some of mine, but I think maybe that subject ought to be brought up as part of the approach here. Again, I could say something, or I can just wait and hear from other people.
Well, I can make the first start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's what is in our theosophical literature is called unmerited karma, and then when it is explained, they already start by saying, well, karma is universal and always works. So cause and effect is always, there's no exceptions. So that is not the point which is meant. But it has to do with the fact that we, as in the present state of our evolution, we as personal men experience many things in our lives which in a certain way have their origins or their causes in former lives. And as we now are, presently, as personal people, we cannot really say that we were the persons which have caused that. When you look to yourself as a real reincarnating spiritual being, it was you. You were it in former lives. And, it is in a certain way, you call it, we are not always realized that. I don't know, perhaps you can?
I agree with Henk. If you fly it on from a more general direction, if you go from the first proposition, everything is one, everything is interconnected, close by, far off, or whatever, there is always effect on each other. Yeah, that is one for me a very important start. And of course, you can ask yourself that when I suffer in this life consequences from past life and I have learned my lessons, is that I am the same or I am different compared by past life? Of course, I am different. So from that point of view, you can try to emphasize the idea that it is unmerited. Yeah? So that is just something what you have not deserved, because this construction has grown and so on and is wiser. But if you see it in the line of consequences, then you should, let's say, realize that it is in consequences from a period that you were less wise and you have the effect now. And in principle, there are many effects in our daily life. What we can see that say, okay, that is in consequences of a moment that I was not wise or clever or how you want to call it. Yeah? But still you suffered from it. And you have to solve that problem. You have still to take your lessons from it, and maybe you have learned your lessons very fast, yeah? And you don't do that same mistake anymore. So for us, that subject is more a matter how do you look at the totality than it is in principle question. Yeah?
I agree with that. I think that's what you said is very true. But in another context, I can't remember exactly where I read all these things, you know, so many areas. But for instance, I think GDP probably said it. Say, for instance, H.P. Blavatsky. She would be a good one. She brought into the world great knowledge and beauty and wisdom and so forth. How was she treated? Yeah, very badly, very badly. In that context, did she deserve to be treated that way? And I can say what I read and what I heard and what I think is true, because I think it maybe would be good to see this picture also. She deserved it in the context that she brought in a subject that was not liked and was very much disliked by a great deal of humanity, and therefore received a just karma of bad aspects from it. In that context, it's unmerited, but in the other context, there will be compensation for that in future lives. She did not deserve this karma, so to speak, but yes, she did deserve it because this was the appropriate reaction of people that were ignorant and selfish to a certain extent. But again, it will be compensated by future events that will be helpful for her, and of course, her main interest was society and humanity. I bring that out. I don't know if I'm correct on this, but I thought maybe that aspect might be appropriate to consider.
Yeah, well, you can also view it in this way. On the same moment, if you come into a certain situation and you disturb the local harmony, and harmony between brackets, because maybe it is not harmony in our point of view, yeah, you should realize that the consequences of coming there, teaching there, disturbed that particular harmony, and that is your karma on that particular moment, what you take on, yeah? What happens in our lectures on regular basis, people coming in are shocked by what they have learned from Theosophical point of view. Sometimes they become even aggressive to us, because his first reaction is, it cannot be true. Because if this is true, and then they start to realize their own responsibilities, yeah, and say, no, I don't believe it, I don't want to believe it, and so. And then it takes a week, days, months, and then they become calm and starts more to realize, and they're coming back to the situation, yeah. Maybe not completely as you say, but I think there is some value in it, yeah? And they become more in harmony with the new ideas and with the new views, point of views they have developed in, yeah? So you should realize, if you start to teach Theosophy in all that typical situations, you should realize that you really can disturb and get waves to yourself, started from bringing a certain knowledge in that particular situation. We had even in the past, and only, what was it, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, people had a technical deal with to install a nice beamer and a lot of things in our lecture hall. And then they ring me up and say, no, sorry, Mr. Vermeulen, we had to look on your website, and we come to the conclusion that our way of living is totally different than yours. So we don't want to do business with you. Yeah? We have done an investigation to have this Point Loma Convivium on the Point Loma site itself. Yeah? They have a very nice lecture halls, no point at all. Answer was, sorry, we recognize that your roots are here, but your point of view of living is totally different with our ones. No. So still it happens nowadays. Dara.
Well, Hiltner gave part of the picture, and true, there will be recompense, but I believe that HPB took on this karma consciously and as a sacrifice. But I also wanted to commend Henk for connecting with what Yoka said yesterday about keeping poverty and wealth out of the political framework. We're not thinking here of a welfare state necessarily. She showed how we shepherd the life atoms because we contact everyone else, and in that contact we affect their life atoms. There's a great interchange. She brought several points on education, and you reaffirmed them by what you said about organizations, to think of the welfare of all beings in the process. And sometimes it's true, we lose perspective as how our basis will affect others, but this is how we learn too, because as the Gita shows us, we learn from both success and failure, but we try to keep the line of motive pure.
Other remarks or questions? Monica?
Can it be that a good behavior stirs or provokes a totally opposite reaction, just an effect of action and reaction? I mean, I found this little phrase, I don't remember it perfectly, in Mahatma letters, when one of the masters was saying about Blavatsky that was upset at one of the public reactions. And she said, the master said, she doesn't remember that royal behavior is rewarded with a horrible behavior from the part of the person that was helped. Like, I mean, it doesn't need to be theosophy. If you're trying to be kind with a person, you get a lot of negativity in the process of helping. That's what happens. But we forget all the time that we need to be prepared for this kind of no thanks, people that are turning their back, that are helped. Indeed, I mean, you help them clearly, everybody sees it, and their reaction is not one, and not a thankful one.
Well, perhaps the first reaction is that when we always remind ourselves that each person has that spiritual part and also that more limited thinking part, then you can imagine that somehow when you really try to live in your most highest ideals, that it both appeals to the spiritual part of some person, which in fact silently says, this is okay, this is the real way. And there is also the personal part who say, ooh, that has so many consequences. No, and that can be a very strong anti-reaction. But I think we must never overlook that that same person may, what Herman said, after a week, after 2 years, doesn't matter, when the whole how do you call it, the whole storm has lowered, will think in a quite different way to the same situation. So in a certain way, I think the master said we are also sowing seeds, and it is the way human beings learn.
I hope we're doing all right on time. Another aspect of unmerited karma, again, I read in GDP, and I can't remember where it was, but he was bringing out a very subtle subject, saying that the reincarnating ego tries to I don't want to use the word push, but to influence or move the lower human ego to evolve, become better. And in some ways kind of, again, pushes it to take on more responsibility than it really wants to take on. It doesn't really want to do this, so to speak, but it can see it and it kind of pushes in that direction. And then the human ego suffers pain from this because it's going into areas it doesn't know well. But it is really the higher ego, reincarnating ego, that is responsible, so to speak. And I throw that out again as another approach to this, which is subtle, in that the whole lower human ego didn't really deserve this, so to speak. It's very subtle, but it's an interesting concept, and one which was, again, brought up by GDP, and I hope other people have read this and will comment whether I'm right or wrong, because I could be misinterpreting, etc.
Yeah, I try to, Richard, I try to understand your question. You say that from the higher self suffered something what he doesn't like, or not was starting in himself. Or do I understand it well?
The lower human ego, or the kama manas, if you will, so forth.
Yeah.
We're of course, that's the area that's having the trouble. The reincarnating ego is much more advanced, etc. But it's trying to teach. It's something like, let me give you an example. If you know some of the things with movies and so forth, you've heard of Bob Hope and who was the other one? Hope and Bing Crosby. It kind of reminds me like Bing Crosby, Bob Hope. Bing Crosby was kind of the smart, person who was sympathetic and saw the bigger picture, was more intelligent. And Bob Hope, which he was kind of like the reincarnated ego. If you'll excuse I hope I don't make a really bad simile here. But he was kind of like the reincarnated ego. Bob Hope was sitting in the background, not doing anything, and he's kind of stupid and funny and, really kind of a slough. And so Bing Crosby says, listen, you really need to help these people out. And I don't want to do that, I don't want to do it. So he kind of pushes him into doing that. And in the long run, Bob Hope becomes really a better person because he did this. He tried to, he put himself out. He wasn't able to do it, but he suffered a lot of pain in the meantime. It was kind of, the funny aspect to it, too. But I use this as an example, as kind of the higher ego saying, listen, get off the stool there and start doing some work here. And I want you to go in this direction, but he doesn't really want to do it. In that context, it's more the human ego, which is pushed to do something it really doesn't quite want to do, and the higher reincarnated ego is more responsible.
Yep.
We have another notion called the auric envelope, which in one sense is the highest principle. And it is the place, it has many functions, where all the seeds of karma are stored, or the inclinations or intentions are there. So they are, you can say, dispersed, these seeds, downward, so that we experience them. So you can say in that sense, we're being led or pushed. The personality, kicking and streaming, doesn't particularly respond too well, at least in the beginning of the path. Later on, we are eager. We want to cooperate with our better nature. So you might say that the response of the personality to that is, we'll be saying it's unmerited, but it is merited because it's part of our higher nature.
It's simply not experienced as such because the lower nature has no remembrance of the lives before where the karma, the seeds were sown. And one of our speakers gives this example very often, and that is that imagine a man who has been drinking a lot in his life. and he became ill, and he saw after a while he should stop drinking, so he does. And in the next 30 years, he is a teetotal and becomes healthy and lives a good life and is a good man. And he totally forgets about the first years of his youth where he was drinking so heavily. And then when he's 70 years old, he gets a liver problem. And of course, the cause is in the very early years that he has forgotten about. So it seems, because he has been living a very good life for a very long time, and he forgot. So it seems that his illness is unmerited. But it is not, because he has sown, when he wasn't as wise as he is now, the causes for that. Now, and if you put this as above, so below, as above, so below, on this example, it can also be the case in many lives with the sowing of seeds. And the lower part of your being simply experiences this as unmerited. It is a view, a limited view, you could say.
Okay, Marina?
To one of the quotes of the lecture that Henk was just giving, he said, if you learn something from it, is that bad karma? Right, so if you look at HPB's life, you might say that it's been very intense, and from the lower aspects of our composite being, it might have been unpleasant. But what's the effect? If you look at it from a different perspective, you might as well say it was a very intense training. And it's from the lower aspects, and maybe from the higher aspects of this composite nature, you might say that the result was that there was a very intense training as well. So a lot of knowledge, a lot of wisdom that was accomplished. So maybe from that perspective, you would like it to be merited as well.
We also have to keep in mind that great ones like Blavatsky and her teachers, their consciousness is not personal. I mean, it just isn't. They are humanity. They completely identify with, maybe HPB not in every aspect of her life, but there are plenty of examples of great ones. And when you identify completely with humanity, naturally the karmic flow of energies is going to be the whole human race. You're just a little point of focus. It's like you're a miniature humanity, and therefore all the things that come your way, good and bad, are the reactions of all the human karma of the whole planet. So that's one of the blessings or trials of becoming spiritually advanced. You identify with an R, this greater hierarchy, and therefore all the complications that come with it. You have great insight, but you also have quite a bit of negative forces that you're stimulating. You're part of it. You are completely identified with that greater whole.
Okay, fine. Yeah. I think it is time to step on to our next point in the program. 5 minutes break so that we are able to set up what we need for